Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
Chair, our first witness today is Mr. Colin Baker.
Yeah.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth.
shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Baker, you should have there in front of you a copy of your witness statement. Do you have that there?
I do.
If you turn over to the last page. Is that your signature there?
It is.
Have you read through this statement recently?
I have.
And is it true to the best of your knowledge?
It is indeed.
That statement is now in evidence in the inquiry. Everything that I ask you now will be supplementary. And can I begin by thanking you for coming to give evidence to the inquiry here today? I'm going to start by asking you a few questions about your background. You started as a sub-postmaster in 1968 in the head office on Stoke-on-Trent, is that right?
Yes, it's not actually a head office. It's a post office in Birch's Head in Stoke-on-Trent.
Oh, I see. And after that, you then joined your local branch, or at that time, you joined your local branch of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters.
I did, yes.
And then you became involved in the North Staffs branch, is that right?
Correct.
You then applied for a full-time position as Assistant Secretary at HQ.
Yes, I did.
That involved moving to Sussex, is
Yes,
that right?
indeed, with my wife and 2 girls.
Then
Not very popular man at the time, I assure you.
Then in 1986, you were appointed Deputy General Secretary of the Federation.
Yep.
And then you went on to become Deputy General Secretary in 1988.
Yes.
And General Secretary in 1999. Is that right?
That's correct.
You say in your statement, and if we could pull that up, please, it's WITN 03780100. And if we could turn to page 3, please. Looking at paragraph 7, you say there that you felt during your tenure this coincided with a period of great change at post office counters. Could you explain what you meant by that, or a bit more?
Yes, I'd love to. Coming from a position of being a sub-postmaster, you're sort of trading on your own, and in your post office, and that was the beginning and end of your world, as it were. And the cash account was primary among all. And moving to Federation headquarters, I realised there was a much bigger world around sub-postmasters than what I thought it was. And that world, I felt, was changing because I got to know that the benefits agency were part of it, part of the change. Post office counters were clearly the prime movers in the change. There was other people within the post office, other unions, etc. And the feeling I had at the time was that if we didn't change to meet the challenges ahead, we probably wouldn't be there for very much longer. I thought that it was a far more dynamic world than I was used to. And that's what I meant by that. Suddenly we were thrust into another type of world, as it were, a world of economics, a world of automation, computers, etc. So much more than I ever thought possible at the time. And so I realised that I had to come out of that sort of mental feeling of what post offices and sub-post offices were and where they fitted into this great big new world that I was suddenly thrust into.
And one of the key issues was that the benefits agency wanted to start making payments into individual bank accounts. Why was that potentially a problem? Well,
that was the bread and butter, really, of a post office, a sub-post office anyway. That if you've ever witnessed outside a post office on a Monday morning or a Thursday morning, because they did what they call peak smoothing for payment benefits at the time. It started on a Monday and then they moved it to Thursday and then they moved back to Monday again. there'd be queues outside the post office. No matter if it was raining, snowing or whatever, they were queuing for the post office to open. And that queue was there nearly all day. Obviously, we used to work hard to try to serve them quickly and get them back home. But it was the bread and butter. That was the basis of really sub-postmasters like myself becoming a sub-postmaster. One, because you serve the public and you were like the focal point within the village, and you can imagine Birchie's Head was not that big. So you become the focal point within the village, but also serve the customers, and that was where you derived your income from. Your post office pay was based on the number of transactions that you did. And the majority of those transactions at the time were pensions and allowance payments.
Did you feel at the time that post offices could survive the BA withdrawing that line of work?
Not unless it was addressed. If we just sat there and said, well, okay, it's going, then we would go with it. But I felt at the time, and I think I make the point in my statement, that we've got to address this. This is something we've got to address. And I was General Secretary at the time. I think I'm right in saying I was General Secretary at the time. And I felt the onus was on me to do something about it. Because as individuals or postmasters, far-flung, ubiquitous, but you don't really know your mate, because it's not like a workshop union. They were individuals. I felt the onus was on me and the Federation, and I took it very seriously, that we've got to address this, and that became my life's work.
At the time, before Horizon was introduced, you would have been aware that sub-postmasters could be prosecuted by the Post Office.
Oh, yes.
And also before Horizon, you would have been aware that sub-postmasters or the Post Office could seek to recover losses from sub-postmasters.
Yes, that was all in the sub-postmasters contract that they signed for the Post Office and with the Post Office, yes. Oh, yes.
Turning to the beginning of the development of Horizon, the NFSP and you were involved from the beginning when Pathway was announced as a chosen contractor, is that right?
That's correct.
And if we turn up a minute from the 5th of September 1996, that's NFSP, I think it's 50120. And if we could scroll down, please. This is a letter from you to executive officers in 1996.
Yes.
And you say, further to the meeting at Pathway on the 23rd of July, you will recall that we were keen to establish the Federation as a partner with Pathway and part of the formal development of the automation platform and its introduction into the network. I'm sure you'll be pleased with the attached letter, which sets in train the first stages of that formal relationship. We will report further developments in due course, at which time we hope to have a clearer understanding of the possible involvement of executive officers and indeed branch secretaries. You will also be interested to know that I've had a meeting with the company who are going to be training sub-postmasters. We have agreed to continue that relationship, as training will be very important as it becomes linked to the rollout programme. And if we turn over the page and scroll down, this is a letter from Paul Rich at Pathway to you from the 4th of September 1996. And if we look at paragraph 2, it says, first, on more strategic issues, I will keep you in touch on a personal basis with overall progress, including an understanding of any critical political and commercial dimensions. So from the very beginning, you have personal contact with Pathway and you're seen as the contact person at the NFSP, is that right?
I was certainly the contact person in the NFSP, yes. The relationship, I think you said this was authored by Paul Rich?
Yes, you can see that if we turn over the page.
I think Paul Rich worked for the Post Office, not Pathway, didn't he? Or at least when I knew him.
Oh, my apologies. You're right, he did work for Post Office. But this is you being point person in relation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Me and the rest of the people in Federation headquarters, of course, but I would be the letterbox.
And he was personally in contact with you?
Yes.
If we turn over to a circular from the 25th of September 1996, that's at NFSP 6035. This is a circular that you wrote to the National Executive Council. And if we scroll down, this is talking about the initial go live, isn't it? And if we look, it says, I'm sure you'll be interested in the attached correspondence, which is information regarding the progress of automation from the original 10 officers previously advised to you in the next phase of the live trial. And if we look down at the fourth paragraph, it says it is planned to launch the system publicly when the remainder of the 10 go live in October. This will clearly help us with our publicity, as the first office was not a member. Whilst we had asked BA Pockle to hold off their publicity until a Federation member was involved in the trial, the lack of a public announcement was probably due to the forthcoming Conservative Party conference and not because Leonard Stanley Post Office was not a member of the Federation. An article is being prepared for the next edition of the journal to provide members with additional information. We can see here that already you're looking to publicise the NFSP's involvement in the automation process. Is that right?
That's correct, but it's not entirely the story. I did have an executive council and branch secretaries and members that wanted to see what the Federation was doing. So it was far better, in my view, for them to read it from, not from my source, from other sources, than for me to tell them. So that in part it was that. Yes, it was beating the Federation's drum, of course, which I thought was my job.
Did you feel at that stage that you really needed to push to get the project over the line for the benefit of your membership?
Yes, and that didn't stop there either. I had that feeling right until I'd finished.
The NFSP had a negotiating committee, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about what the negotiating committee involved?
Yes, they were also postmasters. They were all executive officers. So when you see that I'm writing to a dear executive officer, they'd be included in that. But they were a close team for me, and we used to negotiate pay and conditions of service for sub-postmasters, and the negotiating committee were clearly involved in that. But so was I. So they were, if you like, my close committee to help me to form opinions and make decisions and negotiate.
If we could turn to a meeting minute, NFSP 00000560. This is the report of, you can see there, that's the report of the meeting of the negotiating committee. And if we could turn over to page 7, please. This is the section that deals with counter-automation. And it says, the General Secretary reported he had visited Newcastle on the 27th and 28th of May in the company of Paul Rich and John Bennett, in which area OBCS was being installed in 100 sub-post offices. The reaction from sub-postmasters was of delight. Do you remember that meeting in Newcastle?
I do, yes.
Can you describe what it was like?
Well, it was in a room not dissimilar to this, not quite so big, and there were sub-postmasters in the audience, Paul Rich, myself, I think there was someone else there as well, and we tried to stem any fears that the audience might have had, and to make sure that they were on side as far as the development of this was concerned. But we didn't have anything to do with the actual equipment at that time.
What fears did they have?
Fear of the unknown, I think, but quite honestly, that their post offices, by nature of being sub-post offices, were much smaller than what you'd imagine. Some of them were quite tiny, and so they feared the disruption. They feared computers. I mean, it was a little while ago before everybody had well, they might have had a mobile phone, but that was about it. And so there was a fear of the unknown, fear of automation, fear of their post offices being disrupted, fear of not being able to look at the customer when they were serving them, that sort of thing. And they needed to vent to be honest with you. And part of my style, I think, is to allow people to vent, and then we can allay any concerns that they might have.
So when it says there the reaction from sub-postmasters was of delight,
Yeah, it was.
what's that in reference?
They were pleased that at last they were going to get some counter-automation and some backing and some recognition. They were delighted.
So they were delighted and fearful at the same time.
Delighted at the decision that had been made to automate their post offices, and fearful of what that really meant.
The note goes on to say the action points from the meeting were circulated, copies attached. And if we turn over to page 21, we can see these are the action points. And there's a list of them.
Yes.
If we could turn over to the next page, which is 22. And the third bullet point down, it says sub-postmasters not reporting all systems errors distorting error rate figures. Can you explain what's meant by that?
Well, I can try to remember what they said. I think that the problem is one well known to me, and that is that postmasters working for the post office, if they had a shortage, knowing that in their contract they had to make good shortages, that was what they were contracted to do, that they didn't always report them. They would just make good the sums and move on. But of course, with the automation system, the Horizon system, they needed to report them, and that was the change, because before it was their post office, their cash account. They were responsible for the funds. They knew that, and so they didn't always report shortage of, say, £1 or £2 or £3. They'd put the money in because next week they might have been £2 or £3 over. And so that was the relationship they had with the cash account, and therefore that's why they wouldn't have been reporting. They were not used to reporting every error.
So at this stage it was known that the sums showing on Horizon, sub-postmasters would be required to account for those figures.
Yes. Oh yes, it's a contractual thing.
And how did you feel about the system at this stage? We're in 1997.
Well, the system was one I grew up with. Sub-postmaster, not long since stopped being a sub-postmaster, and it was well accepted by sub-postmasters that they made good shortages when they arrived. And I can tell you that I've spent many hours. We used to balance on a Friday night then. I spent many hours on a Friday night trying to find money that it wasn't balancing. But eventually you've got to go through, you've got to count every stamp and every pension, and you've got to really ground everything within your post office, and that's how you reached a balance. And if you did miss something when you were counting the stock, then you would have a misbalance, and so you've got to keep working until you found a balance.
So at this stage, you were already flagging up to sub-postmasters that they really must report errors because they'll be held accountable for them.
No, not that specific. Not that specific at all. I mean, I didn't recognise at that time that the fact that they weren't reporting all shortages was going to be a heinous thing. I, in my innocence, thought that the relationship that the sub-postmaster had with the cash account was still the same. I know it was automated, but it would still be his post office and the money that he's responsible for. So I didn't see it in quite the light that you've just described.
There were delays with the Horizon project, weren't there?
There were.
Did you find those frustrating?
I did.
If we could turn up a meeting minute from the National Executive Council, NFSP 00000461. This is in March 1998. And if we turn to page 17, and if we can scroll down to the counter automation section, It says, the minutes of the negotiating committee reflected the situation which existed at the time. There had been a great deal of press speculation about the future of the Horizon platform, and that speculation was growing. What were the press saying at that time?
I think the press was saying that it was doomed, that they'd never seen a successful PFI in their life, and this was another one that was going to go down the tubes, basically saying that. They didn't quite use that language.
Intelligence sources are still saying that the benefit agency would like to be disengaged from the project and concentrate on ACT and an updated ALP's style of fraud detection. Everyone in post office counters, the corporation and ICL Pathway were involved in keeping the government interested in Horizon, and the Federation was fully involved with all those and the DTI. The news that John Denham MP would be at the conference was an excellent signal of commitment, and his interest must be maintained. The General Secretary commented the press reports were predominantly true, with government computing containing leaks from the benefits agency. What was morale for sub-postmasters like at this time? What were you hearing on the ground?
I can't really remember the comments from sub-postmasters. I mean, there were many and varied. The morale, certainly around me at the time, was one of disappointment because we really needed this automation. I think that hopefully it comes through in spades. We really needed it, and I was disappointed that the speculation of people writing magazines and novels that it was in peril, and I was really disappointed with that. And I spent a great deal of time trying to find out precisely what the situation was, but I was never allowed close to Pathway and Fujitsu. I was always told, everything's okay.
And who were you asking? You said you went to a great deal of effort. Who were you speaking to, and what channels did you use?
I'd speak to anybody, go anywhere and use any channels to find out, and that did take a lot of time and energy, but predominantly Post Office, Counters Limited, who always reassured me, and I'm sure that that's what they thought at the time. I don't think they were purposely misleading me. And I was reading newspapers, and I got a research officer at Shoreham who was also reading. We were trying to keep an eye on it because this was clearly very important for us. And what I didn't know at the time was just how many people were involved in this decision and how many people were involved in bringing the automation to market. I was amazed to find out, and a lot of it with this hearing.
You also made press releases in support of the project in response to some of the press coverage. If we could turn up NFSP 50280. And if we could turn on to page 4. It says the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, which represents 85% of the UK's army of sub-postmasters, has criticised the media obsession of denigrating the Horizon /automation project, the system which will automate all post offices to provide benefits, payments and banking services in the future. General Secretary Colin Baker acknowledged that press speculation was inevitable, particularly with the Treasury review now reaching a critical stage. Nevertheless, this most recent speculation was causing concern amongst sub-postmasters. Mr Baker reminded everyone that the Minister for Welfare Reform, Mr Frank Field MP, had not only sent his PPS Kate Hoey MP to our annual conference to report good news for the network, but had followed it up with a letter confirming key points. So you're publicly defending the project at this stage in 1999. Is that right?
Let's be specific on this one. I was publicly defending the principle of automation in post offices. I wasn't publicly defending Pathway or anybody else. It just happened to be Pathway, but that was not my choice.
But at this stage, you've said you've asked for, you said you put a lot of effort into trying to get to the bottom of what was going on.
Yes.
And you were being neglected and people weren't engaging with you. Isn't that right?
No, I think they did. I think they did engage with me. They might have been saying what they thought I wanted to hear, and I can't speak for them, obviously. But I don't think I was ignored as such. I think I might have been held at arm's length, as it were.
Because it would have been a problem for the post office, wouldn't it, if the Federation turned against the Horizon project?
Oh, yes, it would have been a problem for postmasters as well.
Because the post office had an interest in ensuring that it continued to have your support, precisely because you would release press releases like this. Isn't that right?
Yes, I think the post office sometimes wondered what was I doing, what was I about. But on this occasion, we happened to be on the same plane.
You were part of the Horizon Working Group in 1999.
Yes.
And you were invited to join this group by Sir Ian McCartney. If we could turn up NFSP 6064. And if we could look at the second paragraph, or rather, sorry, the first paragraph, you will know that following the recent agreement in principle with ICL on completing Project Horizon in a restructured and simplified form, the Secretary of State asked me to set up a small working group of key players to help ensure that the project is now taken forward in a positive and decisive way to a successful conclusion. I have decided to invite 4 organisations to be full members of the Horizon Working Group, namely the Post Office, the Communication Workers Union, the Communication Managers Association and the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. Clearly, we need a dialogue with other organisations, including ICL, the Department of Health and Social Security, the Benefits Agency and the Treasury, but I have not thought it appropriate to include them as full members. And then if we scroll down, we can see that there are 3, he proposes that the group's work would fall into 3 main areas. So firstly, there are the negotiations between POCL and ICL and between POCL and BA that need to take place over the next few weeks to put in place the detailed contractual arrangements that will give effect to the outline agreement reached on the 24th of May. I see a role for the working group in carefully monitoring these negotiations and in addressing and helping to resolve any sticking points that may be encountered. The second area covers the remaining development phases of Horizon, including large-scale live trials, system acceptance, and rollout of the system smoothly and in a timely fashion to all offices within the network, followed by the migration from paper-based methods of benefit payment to ACT-based payments accessible at post offices. I believe that the working group could provide a valuable forum for bringing pressure to bear when needed for seeking solutions to any problems that may arise. And if we can go on to the third area concerns the commercial exploitation of the very considerable potential which the Horizon platform will offer once in place. The combined experience of the working group should prove a valuable source of ideas and contacts for business opportunities and future revenue streams. Does that reflect what you saw the Horizon Working Group to have been set up to achieve? And is that how you found the meetings? Did it cover those areas?
It certainly, I agree with what it was designed to do, or what it was put in place to do. We didn't, as far as I'm aware anyway, get involved in the negotiations between Pathway and the Post Office, and anybody else for that matter. But we did certainly inject ideas regarding the future and how to use the Horizon platform, or how we wanted to use the Horizon platform. And that was most definitely that. And we also had a say in the type of publicity which the Benefits Agency were putting out, because it was clear from that point that the Benefits Agency didn't particularly want Post Office automated.
Did you see your role as providing feedback on the Horizon system itself?
Not in that committee, no. We certainly did feedback to the Post Office, to Post Office Counters Limited, about the Horizon platform, and we did that a lot. But I genuinely can't recall whether that forum was one that took on board our comments regarding the operation of Horizon.
When Mr. Sibbick gave evidence to this inquiry, he said that this was designed as a channel for feeding back from sub-postmasters on the system. Would you accept that?
It might have been set up to do that. I don't think it did.
It didn't because you didn't raise those issues, or because they weren't interested in discussing them?
It was at a higher level. I think, anyway, this is going back a little while. I think that it was discussing things on a higher level than what sub-postmasters at the time were feeding to me, which was, the scales don't work, there's lots of dropouts for the screen, that type of thing that they were experiencing their problems in their post offices, wasn't the right, or didn't appear to be the right forum to be having those sort of discussions.
What would have been the right forum?
The forum I was using, which was I went to the post office and spoke to them at length about it and reported it, and anyone would listen.
If we could look at BEIS, BEIS 0000345. Yes, that's the one. Thank you. This is a steering brief from David Sibbick. And if we turn over to page 2, this is from the 7th of June 1999, and scroll down to paragraph 5, please. It says, the NFSP are likely to warn that fears about the future viability of post offices will lead to further losses of confidence amongst sub-postmasters and post office closures, especially in rural areas. They will ask what the government intends to do about the obvious and very large funding gap that will open beyond 2003 with the progressive disappearance of the BA revenue against the repeated commitment by ministers to the nationwide network of post offices. Given the lack of ministerial consensus on the way forward on this issue, the answer has to be that we look to the members of the group to work together to maximise the very great commercial potential of the Horizon platform, but that the government will be discussing the longer-term viability of the network with the post office in the context of the strategic plan. Was that your position at the time, that you were fearful about the viability of post offices?
Yes.
And again, this was partly because of the disappearance of BA funding.
Yes, as I've explained, it was a fundamental part of the daily life of a sub-postmaster.
In your mind, this was the key issue at this time?
Yes.
To raise with the government?
Yes, yeah. At the time.
Did you feel that this was a particularly difficult time?
It was. In fact, I had some meetings with the benefits agency people themselves, and suffice to say, they were brutal negotiators. They really didn't want this through post offices, and they made that very clear. We really, really did. So you can see we didn't see eye to eye very often.
If we could turn to NFSP 6026, please. And if we turn over to page 2, this is a note of the meeting of the Horizon Working Group on the 8th of June. I think this was the first meeting. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
And it records the issues that you raised. If we could scroll down. If we look at paragraph 1, it states, Mr. McCartney began by acknowledging that negotiations on the Horizon project have been protracted and difficult. He hoped that following the announcement on 24th of May, the working group could keep discussions on track for a successful agreement by the 16th of July. The group would bring together the various strands and give political accountability. From the government's viewpoint, there clearly needed to be effective monitoring and oversight of the project. And if we scroll down to paragraph 6, we can see that you raised an issue at this meeting saying that you had a fundamental point to raise. This was to do with the wording of the second term of reference, methods of payment also accessible through post offices. It says that you felt that that would send the wrong signal to post office staff and sub-postmasters. Where was the long-term protection for the network? Was that a contribution that you remember making?
Yes, it was, yes. Yeah.
At this time, did you know that sub-postmasters were having difficulties with the Horizon project, and that there were difficulties balancing?
I wasn't I knew they had difficulties. They had difficulties with, as I've mentioned before, screens and dropouts and all that type of trouble. And I wasn't aware that there was a major, which I am now, of course, I fully accept, there was a major problem with the balancing. And I think it's because of something that you asked me earlier on, which was about the contractual relationship and making good losses. There has always been losses in post offices and gains, I imagine, and so that bit there was typical, I think, of the everyday working, and so that didn't particularly draw my attention, I don't think, at the time, but others did, and I think this was the Horizon Working Group, if you remember, and what we were discussing was Horizon, and the sort of thing that happens with the light, like the counter screen had to be moved and all that sort of thing. It was a real melee of different things, of which that was one. But I didn't attribute any great concern to it because it was always thus. But I did what I didn't know then, which I know now, of course, is the scale of it.
Do you accept that it was a mistake not to raise this clearly in these working group meetings, these kind of issues?
No, I don't think I do. I mean, it is a wise man who knows what he doesn't know, and I didn't know what was looming, or what was on the pot boiling. It was, it's fundamental. I think what we're talking about isn't that, is it?
What, sorry?
But you're drawing paragraph 6 to my attention.
Yeah, so essentially what I'm putting to you is you're drawing issues out to do with the terms of reference.
Yes.
This would have been an ideal time to say, well, actually, leave aside the terms of reference. Sub-postmasters are having real difficulties with using this new project. It's a real problem, but you didn't do that.
No, because at the time, it wasn't a great issue. Now, I fully accept it was boiling up to become one, but at the time it wasn't. We were talking about the terms of reference, and the terms of reference, there was the benefits agency putting out a leaflet which said, words to the effect of, oh, and you can always go to the post office if you want to. It was promoting automatic credit transfer into people's bank accounts. And all I was doing in that meeting at that point was saying to them, just a minute, let's have a level playing field, if nothing else. So it was really not related to counter losses and the operation of Horizon by sub-postmasters. That was referring to that. It was a high-level meeting. We got Ian McCartney and people in there like that. It was referring to the terms of reference that people were going to follow as it went through. And my concern at that point was, let's have a level playing field. Let's not have automatic credit transfer and just mention sub-postmasters en passant. That was what I was about at that point.
We can see further issues that you raised at this meeting if we turn to page 4. And if we look at paragraph 11 and 12, on Mr. Baker's point about long-term security for the network, Mr. McCartney pointed out that even the benefit payment card would have been a relatively short-term solution, which was never envisaged to have long-term future given the accelerating trend for the new benefit recipients to opt out for ACT. Mr. Baker accepted Mr. McCartney's point that the job was now to secure the success of the platform, but argued that the post office should be flagged up in the terms of reference as the preferred first port of call for benefit recipients. Was that your position at the time, that the job was to secure the success of the platform?
Yes.
This was despite the fact that you didn't have the technical expertise to assess the viability of the platform itself.
That's correct. I didn't have. But I put my trust in the post office and others that did have the expertise, or at least I hope they had. They're the ones that negotiated the contract, and not me. But I did throw myself and the Federation wholeheartedly behind it, because without automation, without that sort of counter-automation, we would be doomed, I'm sure. It was life-saving for us.
What did you know at this time about the reasons why the benefits agency had withdrawn from the project?
I don't think I or anybody else on our side of the dealings really knew why, other than it was a question of how much it cost the benefits agency to push order books through, the amount of fraud that the order books attracted. That was what I thought, but I didn't really know.
Did you ask anyone at the time?
Yes, I asked the benefits agency.
Moving forward slightly to the 10th of June 1999, if we could pull up NFSP 50479. This is another report of a meeting of the negotiating committee. And if we could turn to page 9, please. This is the start of the discussion about counter automation. It seems like this was a standing item on the negotiation committee at the time. Would that have been right?
That's absolutely right, yes.
And if we could turn over to page 12, please. And scroll to the bottom. We can see that it's recorded. The General Secretary and John Peabody advised the committee that they'd gone to the meeting with the preconceived idea that attempts would be made to buy them off and placate them with platitudes. However, it appears the government are worried about the extent of the Federation's influence, and it is our intention to keep them worried. The Federation has a substantial role in the working group and will be in prime position to have as much influence as possible. The Minister is under no illusion that the Federation intends to bide its time and see what is to be delivered before taking any further action. Is that what you said at the time?
Well, that's recorded in the minutes. I can't genuinely remember what I said, but that's in the minutes, so I imagine, yes.
Did you feel like the Federation could have a substantial role in the working group and be influential?
Yes.
On this same page, if we look further down, it says, sorry, just scrolling down.
That's all right. I'll have a drink while you're doing that.
Oh, yeah. Please let me know if you need a break at any time.
Yeah, no, fine. Just thirsty.
It says, some sub-postmasters have had enormous difficulties balancing up and finishing their cash accounts, even to the point of still struggling to finish on Friday nights. Tomorrow's special Executive Council meeting, which is being attended for a short time by Stuart Sweetman and David Miller, is crucial to finding out what has gone wrong with the Horizon programme. ICL, Pathway and POCL say it's not the system. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So at this time, that sounds like a very serious issue that sub-postmasters are reporting enormous difficulties balancing up. To you, was that business as usual or was that new?
No, that's when we sensed that it was escalating. Hence, we got Dave Miller and Stuart Sweetman along to the meeting to account for themselves and for them to hear for themselves what the Executive Council was saying, because we at Federation Headquarters know what the postmaster said to the branch secretary and what the branch secretary said to the Executive Council, because these are Executive Council meetings. And so what we wanted from that meeting was for Stuart Sweetman and David Miller to hear for themselves, not from sub-postmasters, from the representatives ourselves, exactly what they were being told by sub-postmasters.
You said this issue was escalating. Where was this now on your list of priorities as General Secretary?
Right up at the top. I spent more time on this, and I think you'll be able to see it from the evidence that you've got there of just how much time I did have to spend on this. In fact, I don't think I was a proper dad and a proper husband at the time. I was really, really focused on getting this system into post offices to ease the postmasters' minds and give them a bit of money.
You mentioned the meeting the next day on the 11th of June. If we could turn that up, which is NFSP 50539. This is a special meeting of the National Executive Committee. And if we could turn to page 7, please. And we could scroll down. We can see that this is where Mr. Sweetman and Mr. Miller joined the meeting because they only joined for part of it. Is that right?
Yes.
And if we look at after they join, we can see that they're welcomed. And then if we look at the paragraph beginning, Mr. Sweetman, it says, Mr. Sweetman thanked the chairman for the invitation to I think that's to meet. He introduced Mr. Miller. He had 2 roles. He was the existing role programme director of the Horizon project, a position he had held since the beginning of the previous year, and managing director of the new Post Office Network business unit. In the latter role, he would be responsible for all things to do with the Post Office network and the interests of the Federation and its members. Mr. Sweetman's objective at the meeting was to try to bring the committee up to date from his point of view on the path that they had to tread and the route that POCL and the Federation must travel together if they were going to be successful in partnership. And if we scroll down again, it says automation would continue. All the central payments and communications would go into the post office, but there would not be a benefits payment card on the system. Benefits would be paid by barcoded savings books. The contract would run until 2005, by which time benefits would only be paid by the banking system or emergency green gyros. The contract with ICL would change from PFI transactions only going through the system to one where the post office effectively purchased the system from ICL Pathway. A moment ago, you said it was important for Mr. Miller and Mr. Sweetman to come to this meeting and to answer your questions. They seem to think that they're coming for a more general discussion about the project. Would you accept that?
Yes, all I would say is, well, they would, wouldn't they?
And if we can scroll over the page, we can see a number of questions that are put to Mr. Sweetman. So they're to do with ACT, and if we scroll down further, resultant loss of benefits, agency work, and then scrolling down, what plans do you have to become a bank to combat the threat? Scrolling over the page, secure other work or income for the network and reduce your costs. Scrolling down again, how will the decision affect the agreement that sub-postmasters will not have to pay for the automation of their offices? So there's quite a lot of discussion with Mr. Sweetman about things other than the difficulties that are being suffered by sub-postmasters, isn't there?
Yes.
And if we scroll over the page, it's when we get to Mr. Butlin. It says Mr. Butlin referred to the serious problems that the South West was having with the software, especially with the balance, and asked Mr. Miller whether any changes were to be made in that respect. An assurance was sought by the committee that the balance would become more user-friendly, more logical, and easier for sub-postmasters to use. Would it be possible for sub-postmasters to have more input into the way the balance was done? The North East was facing similar problems. Some sub-postmasters were incurring additional staff costs, for example, being around 350 in the 4 weeks that his offices had been up and running. So it's at this stage that the software issues are raised, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's what Mr. Butlin is referring to, is the difficulties that sub-postmasters are having.
Yes.
Do you feel like this, as you said, very important issue has got buried amongst a lot of other issues that were raised at this meeting?
There was certainly a lot of issues raised in the meeting, but I wouldn't have said that any particular issue got buried. It was you can imagine, running a union, particularly with the post office. There's lots of issues to be gone through on the agenda. We had to deal with all of them, and you'll notice that Mr. Miller actually made comment to that point.
Yes,
later.
If we scroll down, I can show you that. It says, this is what you're referring to, Mr. Miller acknowledged there was a problem and there would be a software change to improve the situation.
Yes.
If there were serious problems that could not be overcome in the timescale, the rollout would be delayed. Yes. Would you accept that those are two conflicting points, though, that if there were problems, the timescale for the rollout would be delayed, and that's not something that you wanted either, was it?
No, but we did want it to be right. We didn't want to have automation at any cost, and with warts and all. We wanted it to be right, and so we not only would be pressing the government and the post office and anyone else that let's have this automation in counters, it's vital, but also we wanted it right. Of course we did.
If we could turn over to page 14, please. I think at this meeting there's a discussion about whether or not the Federation should stay and work with POCL or break away. Is that right?
Yes, it was a suggestion by one of the Executive Council, yes.
And why was that? Why was there a suggestion of breaking away?
I think the feeling that we all had, I had the feeling as well, that we were only told what they wanted us to know. You know, they were involved in the negotiations with ICL and Pathway. They knew what the Benefits Agency and what the Treasury and that were people were saying. We didn't. We were, if you like, artisans on this one. We were foot soldiers, and doing our best to get this automation in, but it needed it to be right. And so there was a view that, well, let's cut and run. But I mean, we had suggestions on the Executive Council about buying a bank, buying national savings, all those things, but you talk them through and people realise that maybe it wasn't such a good idea after all.
If we look at the bottom of that page 14, we see a comment from Miss Linden.
Yes.
She said, Miss Linden referred to the controversy concerning the plans for Horizon and questioned whether the Federation was getting the package they needed. She suggested that this being negotiation time was an opportunity for POCL to talk to ICL about modifying and simplifying the package before it was too late. Would you agree with that? Was that a possibility at that time, or did you see that as off the table?
No, I saw it as a possibility at the time, and that was what we discussed with David Miller. And there wasn't a one meeting with David Miller. We had regular meetings with David Miller, and I have to say he was very good, and he did understand whether David Miller could change anything. I don't know, but he could certainly influence it from the Post Office Board, which is where we needed it to be influenced in. I eventually got to the Post Office Board, to the chairman, Alan Layton, but my style is to gather in people that would support us and let them do the supporting, and David Miller was certainly a supporter.
The note goes on to say, the chairman advised that Mr Miller had requested a list of the problems with the software and he would address them and talk to sub-postmasters to see what they wanted on the programme. He was embarrassed that this had not happened already. Did you get a list of those problems with the software?
Well, yes.
Did you understand what they meant?
Yes.
Yep. It also goes on to say it was important that members be advised immediately of the outcome of this meeting, and this needed to be done in a way that would make them aware of the seriousness of the situation without resorting to scaremongering. Why was there a concern about scaremongering?
Well, because we mentioned before about the bad press that this was getting, and we didn't want that to be fueled. You know, we wanted to. We didn't want to wash our dirty linen in public, let's put it that way. We wanted this to be a success. We still wanted it to be a success. And so what we didn't want to do was to scaremonger so that people that wanted to could write articles about it, nasty ones.
Turning forward to the 14th of June, a few days later, there's a select committee hearing, and if we could turn up POL 000285222. And if we could look at page 2, we can see there the record of the Trade and Industry Select Committee meeting. If we turn to page 6, we can see this is the submission by the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters. Were you involved in putting this together?
Yes.
And if we turn to page 9, this is a section on programme delivery. And if we look at the third paragraph underneath programme delivery, on the system side, our understanding is that the system has been moved successfully through the final stages of testing prior to addition of the remaining officers to make up the balance of 300 taking part in the formal live trial. The training courses, go-live arrangements and support arrangements, both at offices and via the helplines, were ready to ensure a successful trial prior to national rollout. You don't mention in your submission that there are sub-postmasters who are suffering difficulties with using the system, do you?
No.
Why was that?
Well, I think as I said before, this had got a slow roll. It wasn't immediately big and serious. This was, most certainly we couldn't take our eyes off it, but it was a slow roll. And there's always been losses in sub-post offices, and, you know, they've been addressed over time. But I could only repeat to government and to the select committee what's been fed to me. And that comes through the branch secretary, the executive council, and then the meetings and the sub-postmaster, and sub-postmasters would write to me as well. And it was not an issue, in my view, at the time, to be raised to a select committee.
Shortly after this, on the 21st, 22nd and 23rd of June, there's a National Executive Council meeting. And if we could turn that up, it's at NFSP 50471.
Yeah.
And if we could turn to page 22, please. And scroll down to the bottom. We can see here that this is where counter-automation begins to be discussed again. And if we turn over onto page 23, and we look at the second paragraph, we can see it says the General Secretary described an excellent radio interview broadcast on the Jimmy Young Show, Radio 2, with himself and the Labour spokesman, Mr Martin O'Neill. The select committee meeting he had attended with Mr Pemberty had gone very well. They appeared to be given longer to speak than anybody else, and he felt they'd been given a good account of themselves. The select committee seemed very much in favour of sub-post officers. Is that how you felt about that select committee meeting?
Yes, it was.
And if we scroll down, it states, there was general discussion on the severe difficulties being experienced by sub-postmasters who are already running an automated system. 7 sheets of comments from the North East have been passed to Mr Dave Miller. The difficulties and trauma being experienced by some sub-postmasters were giving rise to concerns for their health and emotional well-being. It was felt by some that a tragedy was not far away if something was not altered soon. The software was considered to be poor quality and not intended to run such a huge network. The system is based on ECO, which is originally written for a network of 700, not 15,500. Do you remember these comments being made at this meeting?
Yes.
How did sub-postmasters feel, or how did the representations that you were hearing sound? Does this accord with it?
Yes, it does.
So people were discussing trauma. Yes.
Yes.
Was that very concerning for you?
Of course it was, yes.
Was that something that you felt you needed to action immediately?
Yes, and we did. And I was reassured that it couldn't possibly be the Horizon programme. That was perfect. And I went through a process of seeing different people at different heights within the post office, and that was the standard answer I received. It was a very, very difficult time, to be honest with you, and it just seemed as though, for all the pressurising that we were doing to people, that was the answer that we were getting.
It goes on to say, although there may be improvements to the general system, most members present wanted to know if the committee had the power to say that the current system is obviously not working and instruct ICL and the post office to review or restart with more sub-postmaster friendly software. Was that something that you considered?
Well, I didn't think in my wildest dreams we'd be able to get the post office, or anybody else for that matter, we couldn't instruct them, ICL or anybody, to change the system, but they were left in no doubt of how we felt about it, and that we weren't satisfied with the sort of answers that we were getting. But even worse than that, we weren't satisfied with the way that the security division were treating sub-postmasters, as though they didn't have any say in the matter at all. That was awful. I mean, it's bad enough for the system to be not good, but for the post office to follow it up security division to follow it up with browbeating, pressurising sub-postmasters was unforgivable.
But why did you feel you couldn't go to ICL and the post office and say, look, why don't you start afresh?
Well, we didn't have any negotiating powers with ICL, of course. We could only ask. And the post office, we did ask. We did ask, and we were told it'll work its way through.
If we turn over to page 24, we can see some of the further concerns that were raised by sub-postmasters. Sorry, if we could go back to the previous page, it starts there. Yeah. Mr. Marshall reported it took 2 hours for his printer to come back, and since then, after printers on different counters had gone down, it's taken at least 2 hours for each to become operational again. Rebooting the system takes at least 12 minutes, and taking into account all the time spent on the telephone with the helpline, it takes many hours to balance on Wednesday afternoon. There have been reports of sub-postmasters working until 10 or 10:30, which is not only stressful but eroding their free time. And scrolling down, Mr. Janetta said that he and others of his colleagues would have to rely on those sub-postmasters in the North East and South West who currently have this system in place to make sure their voices are heard with their problems and to ensure that all difficulties encountered are satisfactorily overcome. The point must be clearly made to the business that this automation is not going to do the job, that sub-postmasters have learned enough to know it will not work satisfactorily, and that it must not be rolled out to in excess of 15,000 sub-post offices until all the problems have been overcome. The Richard Jackson automated system was considered by both Mr. Marshall and Mr. Darville to be an easier to use, preferable alternative to the present system. Mr. Darville wanted to know if the lawyers had some hold on the Horizon system for some reason that it could not be changed. How did it make you feel hearing stories like this?
I was very, very uncomfortable at the time throughout because I felt as though I was banging on doors to make my points made, but I was sent away with some smooth words. But I felt helpless, really, in not being able to go to ICL. I did have meetings with I forget his name, a gentleman from Pathway, and made him know exactly what was going on, but whether that was fed back in, because the relationship between the post office and ICL was out with me. I didn't have anything to do with that. And it's sad to say, I wish I had done.
If we could scroll down again a little bit, and a bit more. It says, Mr. Edmondson felt that in general, most of sub-postmasters' difficulties and complaints about the system were being largely ignored. Do you feel like your concerns were being largely ignored?
I felt as though I was being listened to. And after I'd gone out of the room, I'd gone out of the room. That's what I felt. But I still had to keep on championing the cause. I couldn't stop. I was on this treadmill. I had to get it done. I had to get it delivered. But I had to tell them about all the problems as well. So I don't think the post office looked endearingly at me at the time. But I had to do what I had to do.
If we could look at page 25. It refers to, if we look down the page, Mr. Pebbody thanked the council for their information, and that reflects the concerns that were voiced by the various representatives. And it says they were exactly the problems expressed to Dave Miller at their meeting on the 11th of June. We've already been to the minutes of that meeting. Do you feel like they were fully raised at the meeting on the 11th of June?
Yes, I do. I felt as though we'd done our job with David Miller and Stu Sweetman. That was the meeting you referred to, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, I do.
Turning over the page, to page 26, and if we scroll down, It says, the General Secretary was asked by Miss Linden to confirm the rollout would not take place until the problems had been resolved. She said her region was being told August. Mr Baker was emphatic that this would not be permitted to happen and the resolution of problems prior to rollout could be ensured. The Federation had equal standing with other participants in the working group and our views would therefore receive equal consideration. Is that right, that you had the power to refuse rollout, or you felt you had the power to refuse rollout if the problems weren't resolved?
No, I don't think it was right. I'm reading this and, well, they're minutes taken at the time, so I can't argue with that. But I might have been emphatic that we would let everybody know, but we, the Federation, didn't have the power to stop the rollout. We did have the power to tell people in the position of power what the situation was, and we did. But we were a very small cog in a very big wheel, and I did my best. We did our best to bring these to the attention of the Post Office, but we didn't deal directly with ICL or anyone else really. So all we could do was refer back to the Post Office, Dave Miller and all those that were delivering this project to Post Office, because you'll know there was loads and loads of people delivering the projects, and some people making sure the counters were okay, others making sure that the screens were, loads of people, and we told them all what was going on, but it was frustrating to think at that time that we wanted to bring it home, but we also wanted correcting things that were going wrong.
So coming back to this minute, I think you say if the minute says that, then you probably did say it. But would you accept that in saying that you wouldn't permit rollout to happen, you were overstating to your members the power that your group had?
Yes, I would. If that's what I'd said, I would definitely say that we were overstating our powers.
If we could turn to page 27. Sorry, actually at the bottom of page 26. It says, discussion at length took place between members as to whether a public campaign should be started. Many felt that action should begin at once. I think action should begin at once, while others felt that we may lose the goodwill of government and the Post Office if an offensive was launched immediately. A militant attitude may also jeopardise the Federation's acceptance as an equal member of the working party. In general, it was felt that no plans could be made until after the issue of the government's white paper in early July, and the contract was signed on the 19th. Can you explain what happened at the meeting and why and how it was decided that a public campaign shouldn't be launched?
I can't actually. I can tell you the experiences at the time, but I can't remember that particular discussion. We had two campaigns. We marched on Parliament on both. The latter one we had, can't remember the dates precisely, we delivered a petition for 4 million signatures to Tony Blair. And these were signatures, not e-signatures, signatures. And that was important. It's important we did that, and that was the second one of the two, because the only power we got, really, was the number of customers that were coming through our doors. That was our strength. And so we showed our strength. That's the way we showed it. We don't go on strike. There isn't even a no strike agreement. It's just that postmasters or shopkeepers as well as postmasters, and they wouldn't close their doors anyway, and why should they? So that was how we exercised our power. And out of that come the PRU report, out of that select committee reports. We were pretty influential for being a small cog in a big wheel. We were. But, so militant attitude? Is a march on Parliament of thousands of postmasters? Probably is bordering on militants. Only like some postmasters can be militant, of course. So, no, we do it when we need to.
Were you telling people at this time they shouldn't criticise the Horizon system publicly?
I've certainly said that. I don't know whether it's this time or not, but I've certainly said, be careful what you say about Horizon outside, because we don't want to kill it. We want it to happen, but we want it to happen right. So while we within the Federation are arguing with the Post Office, arguing with anybody else that'll listen to us about the faults that's wrong with it and the difficulty we're having, we still wanted it to happen. Let me say, I hold no torch for Pathway or ICL. We didn't have any say in who got this contract at all. We weren't not allowed to go anywhere near it. But having got it, it's the best we'd got. We hadn't got anything else, and so we needed to make it a success. So it's always a balance. Life's a balance, and that was a balance.
Turning to page 27 and scrolling further down, please, to the National President. It says, the National President asked the meeting if everyone was happy with the agreed way forward would be decided on the 11th of July and that a public campaign would not for the moment be pursued. So the upshot of this meeting was, let's wait and see. Is that right?
It would appear that way, yes. I couldn't honestly say, but it would appear that way.
Chair, I'm looking at the time. This might be a convenient moment for a short break.
Yes, but can I just ask Mr. Baker one or two things before we do that, if we're leaving that document? On a number of occasions, in answer to Council's questions, you've said that you raised it with the Post Office, all right? And I want you to be, if you can, a bit more precise about the personnel that we're talking about,
Right.
all right? So I understand, or I think I understand, that some of the occasions you may have raised this would have been with Mr. Miller.
Correct.
And was that a direct you to Mr. Miller sort of thing in a discussion between the two of you?
Yes, well, I'd probably have my colleague John Peverty with me. I think you've got him to come later on.
But a small group of people where you were discussing these things frankly, is that
Correct,
what I'm
yes.
to
But he
understand?
didn't stay at Dave Miller. We had, there was David Mills, who was the chief executive at some point, Alan Layton, who was the chairman of the Post Office, Stuart Sweetman. We'd be anyone that we could talk to, we would. I mean, if you can hear desperation in my voice now, I'm only echoing what it was like at the time.
All right, so do I get the impression that you would raise these issues with as many senior Post Office people as you could?
Yes, anyone that would listen.
Right, and was this done in an arranged meeting, or would you pick up the phone, or what are we talking about here?
Well, anything, any of those, an arranged meeting, pick up the phone, try to take him to dinner one night and coax him into having a glass of wine and listening to me, and anything that I could to bring it home to the Post Office. And in fact, many days in my working life, I'd work Monday to Friday in my office in Shoreham. I'd then jump on a train and go to London to see people there. And then on a Saturday, I would get in my car and drive up to Cumbria, say, and do a dinner dance there and speak to some postmasters. That was my life. I was doing nothing else.
All right, I think I've got the full flavour now. So, yes, let's have our break. What time shall we recommence?
11:30.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Chair.
Hello there.
Restarting with the evidence of Mr. Baker, if we could call back up NFSP 00, yes, that's the one. We were looking at this document when we left off, but if we could scroll down to the bottom. You left this General Executive Council meeting to go to a working party meeting, is that right?
That's
And we see your report at page 27 onwards. And if we turn over to page 28 and scroll down, we can see there that it says, your report says, the subject of systems faults was raised and the NFSP were given assurances that there would be software improvements to cure the present difficulties. The Federation were asked for more precise numbers of sub-postmasters who were experiencing difficulties, as this information would assist them to provide us with the help we require. Is that what happened at the meeting?
That's what happened, yeah. That's a report of the meeting we had with them. We also had a meeting with the post office about it, and we did give them the information, yes.
We also have the working party minutes of that meeting. If we can turn up NFSP 50203 and onto the next page. And if we look at paragraph 5, we can see there that you say, Mr. Baker said it was extremely important for the rollout to be absolutely right. With so many planned per week, there would be risk of collapse otherwise. It doesn't record there that you raised issues with software problems. Was that something that was missed off the meeting minute?
I was making a general point there, as far as I can recall. But most certainly it was important the rollout to be absolutely right. And that sentence embraces all aspects of the rollout.
But you just left a meeting where you were hearing really distressing things about what sub-postmasters were going through.
Yep.
Did you not think at this meeting you should front and centre be saying, this is terrible, let me tell you about what sub-postmasters are going through?
I can't recall whether I said that or not, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, that's a minute that obviously somebody was taken, and I don't know whether that was paraphrasing what I said or shortening or whatever. I don't know, I can't remember. But yes, it was ringing in my ears. It has been for some time.
And did you feel that you got your point across to the working group that this was such a serious issue?
It's a cautious yes, because getting your point across is one thing. Whether anybody takes any notice of it, whether you've got it across, is entirely something else. And I was and remain very concerned that whilst I was talking to the working group and the management of the Post Office Counters Limited, David Miller, etc., the people in the Post Office Investigation Department, whether there was a disconnect between the two, I don't know. But the treatment that they were meting out to sub-postmasters were not in any way in the spirit of the discussions I was having with them.
You mentioned correspondence with David Miller. On the 24th of June, you sent a letter on to the executive officers that you received from David Miller. If we could call that up, it's NFSP 000073. And if we could first look at the letter, which is on page 2, and scroll down. This is a letter in response to something that Jean Kendall presented with a list of issues that sub-postmasters, or as the NFSP saw it, that the sub-postmasters were having. And if we could scroll over onto the 3rd page and scroll down, we can see there that David Miller, under training, is saying this is probably our greatest area of concern and is being pursued vigorously with ICL pathway. The areas you've identified, such as balancing and cash account, are part of the redesign, which is currently taking place and is based on sub-postmasters' real experience. That would suggest that David Miller saw some of the balancing issues as concerned with training. Is that how you read that?
Yes.
And if we turn over to page 4, we can see balancing has been raised as a separate issue. And and it says your concerns about printing, redeclaration of stocks and identification of first and second class stamps and postal orders are already in the process of resolution, and a software drop in July will deal with them. However, there are issues around the balancing process which are part of the training response and have yet to be satisfactorily addressed by Pathway. Clearly, this is something on which we will base our decisions about acceptance and rollout. So there you're being told there are issues with the software, which will be dealt with by a software release, or there are issues with training, which will be dealt with by training. And if we turn back to page 1 and scroll down, we can see that in sending this letter on, you say, please see attached a letter from David Miller which goes some way to explain the problems and corrective action which has been taken. Did you feel that corrective action was being taken at that time?
Not at that time, no, but I believe that corrective action would be taken once it's been reported to David Miller, and his actions should prove so. And I mean, this actually underlines the point about your earlier question. It's about who did we raise it to, and whether did he take any notice of it. Well, I think that statement from David Miller demonstrates that yes, we did, and yes, he did listen.
Yeah. You say that it goes some way to explain the problems. What did you feel was outstanding? What other things did you want answers on?
I was desperate to get answers about the treatment that sub-postmasters were receiving from the Post Office Investigation Department when errors had been discovered or reported. They were treated as criminals. And I was offensive to me, and I wished that I could do something about it. But whenever I pushed on that door, I was told that the system can't make errors. You know, what you put in, you get out, sort of thing. And I resented that. That's what I meant by that.
But were you, to be clear, were you raising issues about the system itself or the action that was taken by Post Office against sub-postmasters?
I was referring to the latter of those at the time. Although the system and the hardware and software, and yes, we were deeply concerned about that as well. We wanted it to be a success, but not at any cost. And one of the costs were the treatment that the people represent. I never call people my members, but in fact, that's how I felt.
Did you believe the Post Office at this time when it was saying to you it was infallible and Horizon was always right?
At that point, I really had no choice but to believe them, because they were the masters of it all. I mean, I wasn't, and I did believe actually in the Post Office up to some point, and I can't remember precisely what point we're at this stage. But you tend to want to believe them, because that's what you want to hear. You wanted to hear that the system is robust. But in fact, what sub-postmasters were saying to me was, no, it's not.
Turning forward to the 7th of July 1999, it's NFSP 50200. And if we could turn up page 2. This is a further meeting of the Horizon Working Group. And if we look at the contributions you and the NFSP make, if we look at paragraph 4, there's mention of acceptance testing. Mr. Miller said this was going ahead with ICL to a pre-agreed programme. Mr. Pebbody asked what defined a high category incident. Mr. Miller said this would be one which threatened progress with the project within an agreed timescale. He did not think there would be major problems. Mr. Hodgson emphasised the need for regular progress reports. At this meeting, you're not making a point of raising the balancing issues that sub-postmasters are facing, are you?
No, not, no. Can I just interject here at this point?
Please.
It didn't start with the Big Bang, as I explained before. It was a gradual increase in the numbers of sub-postmasters. And I only get to hear what is fed to me. Now, there's 3 classes of sub-postmasters, can I put it that way? There are those that are members of the Federation and would refer it to the branch secretary, and who we hope would refer it up. There are non-members who wouldn't, obviously, because they're not members. And a third category is those that felt embarrassed that they had losses in their post office and weren't saying anything. And so we had to amass this information the best way we could. And it should be fed back to the Federation headquarters via the branch secretaries and the Executive Council. If that didn't happen, we wouldn't get to know about it. And so at this point, 1999, it wasn't the real problem that it is now. And so we were making decisions on what we knew at the time.
If I could refer you to paragraph 9 of that document, which is on the next page. It says, moving on to a report on the government's intention to establish an interdepartmental working group on POCL funding issues. Mr McCartney said the current speculation in the press on the future of the network was not helpful, a helpful background. Mr Baker said that he thought the group should have a role in disseminating good news stories to counter the scaremongering. What did you mean by scaremongering in this context?
The people that were saying that it was doomed. I think something like I don't hate to say it, Computer Weekly maybe, or something like that, was saying the system's buggered.
But at this stage, you've got sub-postmasters telling you they're suffering with all these difficulties, and you're proposing to go forward and speak to the press about how positively it's a good thing. Is there a tension there?
Yes, I've explained the dilemma that we have. We want it to be a success. We wanted this to happen because without it, we'd be dead in the water. But we also wanted it to be right. Now, as far as the public were concerned, they didn't know, or we didn't want them to know that it was perilous and threatened. We wanted them to think it was fine. But we, in our negotiation, wanted to tell the post office that we were very worried about it. So there's the tension there between the two. Yes, of course, but that was my job at the time.
Moving on to the 10th of August 1999, there was a special Horizon meeting in Newcastle. If we turn up NFSP 50237. And you went with David Miller of POCL to this meeting. And it records in the second paragraph that Mr Miller gave a short address followed by Colin Baker, General Secretary, NFSP. Mr Miller told the meeting that Horizon was formally accepted 2 weeks ago. Trigger points were important. And I think if we scroll down further, it says the meeting was then opened for sub-postmasters to comment on the Horizon programme and for questions to be asked of POCL and requests made for future actions. So at this stage, at this meeting, sub-postmasters are being encouraged to share their experiences of the Horizon programme, aren't they?
Yes.
And if we scroll down again, it says general point, agreed by all on the trial of the stress on the workforce, the strain on people's lives and marriages, lost holidays by some sub-postmasters, the miserly amounts paid by POCL to sub-postmasters on trial. Colin Baker explained that the amounts paid were not negotiated by the Federation, but on the Federation's representatives, the amounts had been doubled from the cash to be paid. Sub-postmasters told of costs up to 780 in extra wages. And of the 44 Horizon officers present in a vote, 30 officers said they suffered stress, and only 4 thought payment was sufficient. And they had been first in the phase. Was this a difficult meeting for you?
No, not really. It was, again, part of my technique to put management in front of sub-postmasters and let them hear for themselves. So it wasn't a difficult meeting for me. It might have been difficult for David Miller, but they were doing, sub-postmasters doing what I wanted them to do.
If we turn over the page, it says, all officers agreed that a checking system without information having to be removed is essential to the successful use of the system. What was that about?
I really couldn't tell you. I really don't know. Sorry about that.
Was it mentioned that it would be helpful to have a way that sub-postmasters could check the Horizon data to see if it was correct?
It might well refer to that, but for the life of me, I can't remember what that point is.
If we turn to page 4, under balancing, every office complained of system failure, every balance day need to reboot. POC will have system to know how many reboot without officers informing POCL, but no action taken by POCL to improve the situation. Waiting time a helpline for rebooting instructions make SPMs act on their own. This sounds like quite a dire situation. Did it feel that way?
Yes, for those officers involved in that part of the trial, yes, it was. It was dire,
And
and it was all referred to the post office.
so did you see that as your role to allow sub-postmasters to say what they wanted to the post office, and then that was the end of your role in respect of these issues?
No, it wasn't the end of my role. My role was ongoing for many years, but most certainly it was part of my technique to put postmasters in front of managers with us there and let them vent their feelings and let them tell them what precisely. Because although I can tell them, it's nothing like hearing it from the postmasters themselves.
And if we look at the very bottom of that page, it says, all officers agreed there was nothing fundamentally wrong with the system. However, they did not want rollout until further improvements had been made. Was that something that you decided you would keep an eye on to see whether those improvements were made?
Yes.
Moving forward in time to the 11th of October 1999, if we can turn up NFSP 6066. And if we could turn to page 4. And if we could look at paragraph 5. So this is the start of the meeting notes, but if we look at page 5, paragraph 5, we can see Mr. Miller explained that formal acceptance of the reconfigured Horizon system plan for the 18th of August had been postponed because of POCL's concern about training, system stability, data integrity. There had been an unacceptably high level of screen freezes and effective operation of the help desk. The post office had accepted the system on the 24th of September on the basis that effective remedial action had either been completed or was in hand. So at this stage, Mr. Miller is flagging up that there are issues with data integrity in the system. Is that right?
Yes.
Did that ring alarm bells with you?
No more than were already there, to be honest with you. That we obviously knew there were problems with it, and we wanted him to address it.
But you've previously said that you knew that postmasters would be responsible for the losses.
Yes.
If there's an issue with data integrity, it logically follows that they could be responsible for losses that didn't exist, doesn't it?
Correct.
And so was this now highest on your list of priorities?
I don't know. I don't know what was highest on my priorities at all. I was very concerned about what the investigations were going on, or lack of it, but I can't really say whether it was the highest or not.
And if we look further down to paragraph 7, scrolling down, it says, Mr. Deegan asked about the issues of spare capacity and triggers for payment. Mr. Miller confirmed that the post office was clear that they would be able to use spare capacity on the system. This had previously been an issue of dispute with ICL. The post office will pay ICL 60 million on the 24th of October on initial acceptance of the system, and will pay ICL a further 80 million when they achieve rollout to 1,600 offices, which is planned for around Christmas time. ICL would not receive payment until the target had been reached, though the post office was not expecting significant slippage. Mr. Baker expressed support for the post office position. While there was a need for ICL to hit deadlines, it was also important for the system to be delivered in full working order. The feedback which Mr. Baker had received from NFSP members was intermittent and not all positive, but problems now seemed to be being sorted out and training seemed to improve. Is that an adequate reflection of the feedback that you were receiving from NFSP members at that time?
Yes, at that time, I'm pretty sure it was.
That it was not all positive? What I've just shown you is...
No, it's definitely not all positive.
Would you agree it was generally quite negative?
I would agree that it was not all positive. I'm quite sure where we would draw the line there.
You had an opportunity here to cut through and say to the working group, sub-postmasters are finding this really difficult. We don't think it's fit for purpose. We're talking about whether we could go with something completely different. But you decided not to do that here. Why?
This was the Horizon Working Group, chaired by government. Those sort of discussions were left for management of the post office and those that were responsible to delivering the programme. This is, we go from actually 950 post offices automated to Mr. Baker expressed support for that position, fine. And then it says he's received from members that it was not all positive. Well, that was that high-level discussion, that was a high-level statement.
With the benefit of hindsight, do you wish that you'd raised this as an issue at that time?
With what I know now, yes.
Moving forward to the 15th of November, there's another note of the Horizon Working Group at NFSP 6063. And again, given your previous answers, if we turn to page 5, that's the start. You don't raise the issues that sub-postmasters are having with the system. Was that again because you felt it was inappropriate to do so in this forum?
The bit I'm looking at talks about the child benefit form. Am I missing a little bit?
Yeah, sorry, scrolling down. And you can see there that there's discussion of the child benefit form. And if we go through, let me know if you'd like a moment to read through it fully.
Which bit?
Well, what I'm putting to you, in a way, the note in its entirety. We can have a break for you to read it, but you didn't feel it appropriate to raise the issues that the sub-postmasters were having with the system in this working group.
Not in this working group, no. I did raise concerns in this working group, and you'll see at paragraph 5 what I said there, but not this working group, no.
At the beginning of January 2000, the Post Office started looking at reforming the policy on losses. If we could turn up NFSP 50361. And if we can blow that up and scroll down, please. In the second paragraph, it says, as discussed over the phone, the policy should have been amended to cover how we deal with subsequent losses, as the current policy could be deemed punitive. Do you remember what that current policy was?
Can I just see who's authored this letter?
Yes, sorry, scroll down. It's Steve Gibbs.
Oh, Steve Gibbs, yes. Okay, thank you. I think the policy was, as I set out earlier, contractual. So postmaster's responsible for all losses incurred, including those of his assistants. Now, we've identified at this stage that there's glitches in the system, and I think what this is saying, if I recall it, is that we need some leniency in this. We're not trying to come away from the contractual side of it at all, which is there and is agreed. But because the postmasters were now sending their cashier cards off through Horizon, and there was some funny stuff happening to it when it got there, we needed another look at this, really, and we needed to engage with Steve Gibbs and whoever. Put a little bit of leniency in it. But even then, at this stage, we weren't aware of what was coming down the track regarding postmasters' losses and how many there were.
If we could turn forward to the 1st of February 2000, when you received a letter from Don Gray, that's at NFSP 50348. And I think it starts by saying, I'm sorry to learn from our recent telephone conversation you'd received no affirmation of Horizon National rollout from the 24th of January. Was that right? Were you not informed of that?
As far as I can recall.
And if we look at the third paragraph, scrolling down, it talks about the system since rollout. And it says, hopefully these improvements will have an evident beneficial effect and tackle the problems identified in the pre-Christmas research that was done via 335 telephone interviews with staff and agents who were involved in Horizon Rollout last autumn. There is some positive feedback from this research. For example, 36% improvement in the ease of balancing, 90% found the system was easy to use, fewer dissatisfied with training than in live trial, and 80% satisfaction with the automation programme in general. Did you consider that this was an improvement and that improvements were being made throughout this time?
Yes, I did.
Do you understand what was meant by a 36 improvement in ease of balancing?
Yeah, I do.
What were they? Or what was it?
It was 36% of officers had experienced an improvement in ease of balancing. Now, for the life of me, I don't know what they thought was easier, but I can only take it on face value that 36% had an easier balance. I can't know what goes on in every post office in the land all the time.
Turning forward to the 10th of February 2000, if we can pull up NFSP 50261. Scrolling down. This is a letter that you wrote to executive offers, saying having been put I think it's putting pressure on the automation director for some information regarding Horizon Rollout. I'm sure you're keen to see a letter which we received, which sets out the position following the review held by the Post Office Network Unit. Hopefully a regular dialogue will soon be established at a territorial level in order to assist members to overcome the difficulties they may well experience as their offices are automated. And if we turn over the page to page 2, sorry, page 3, and scroll down. This is a letter that was written to you from David Smith. And if we look at the fourth paragraph, it says the feedback points in the direction of training, balancing and help desks as the major improvement areas, with balancing very much the common theme. However, in each of these areas, outlets are more or less evenly split between those who think we've got it right as opposed to wrong. The trick to be pulled off is to improve matters for those who believe we need to improve without turning off those who think we've got it right. So, in terms of balancing being the common theme in terms of feedback points, was this what you would have expected the feedback to be at this stage of the rollout?
Yes, I only get bad news from sub-postmasters, by the way. They don't write in and say how lovely things are. So I would not be surprised at that at all.
Were you concerned that the Post Office seemed to repeatedly attribute issues to training rather than the Horizon programme itself?
Yes, because they were consistently saying at this stage that there was nothing wrong with Horizon. It was perfect. You only come out what you put in. And so that was why they were focused on training and things. And I do believe that the people that I was dealing with at the time believed that. But I'm not sure now, with the benefit of hindsight, that there were those who knew something was not entirely correct.
Moving forward to the 4th of May 2000, if we could turn up NFSP 6020 and scroll down. This is a letter that you wrote to a circular to the National Executive Council. And in it you say, you may no doubt be aware that there were significant difficulties with Horizon balancing at some post offices yesterday. We are waiting for a definitive answer from POCL on the problems encountered. However, what we know so far is that a problem arose last Thursday morning in the uprating of stamps, and resulting from poor advice, some sub-postmasters did not correctly complete the upgrading of stock reconciliation that day. That manifested when they tried to balance yesterday. As a result of the difficulties, the system tried to produce a negative balance, but Horizon will not allow a negative balance, and therefore sub-postmasters balances could not be completed. Do you remember this specific incident?
I do, yes. I remember being at the office late, trying to resolve the situation from my position afar, really.
Did you think that it could have been an issue with the Horizon system itself?
Oh, yes, yeah, definitely did.
And if we turn over to page...
I think, though, there was some telephone problems there. I think it was a telephone line that might have not been working. Don't hold me to that.
If we can turn over to the second page, it says the difficulties with Horizon yesterday, we were advised, was primarily not a systems fault. It was primarily difficulties encountered by sub-postmasters last Thursday in understanding the instructions for uprating their postage stock, which lead to balancing difficulties yesterday. And when you say we were advised, where's that come from?
The only people it could have come from was the Post Office Counters Limited, but at what level that would be, I don't know.
So even at this stage, the Post Office were saying to you, it's to do with user error, rather than an issue with the system.
Oh yes, oh yeah. They were adamant that the Horizon was perfect, and there were user errors.
When you say they, who was it who was saying this to you?
Well, right up to David Miller, I think.
The last paragraph says they have accepted that there is a clear learning point to make sure instructions are more understandable, and they have also accepted a need to review and communicate the difficulties of what they have learned both to those within the business and to sub-postmasters. They are, however, trying to deal with the problems today, and clearly this is the most critical aim for them to focus on. So did you feel that you were forced to accept what the Post Office was saying, that there was no systems error, and you had to proceed from there?
Yes, yeah.
At this period of time, you've known that there are issues with sub-postmasters struggling to balance for over a year. Do you think you could have done more at this stage when this type of issue arose to stand up for sub-postmasters?
For more than a year comment, could you just repeat that? I'm not quite sure.
So I've taken you through a number of minutes that show that sub-postmasters back to 1999.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So just to ask my question again, did you feel at this time it was time to escalate this or to do more to try and say to the Post Office, look, these issues have been going on for over a year, we need to do something about the system?
Yes. Yes, I did.
If we could move to the 5th of October, you received a circular from Paul. If we could turn up NFSP 50406.
Can I see who's signed it, please?
Yes, well, I was going to ask, if we turn over the page,
Okay.
I was going to ask you if you remember this or who sent it to you, because it's not signed.
I don't actually remember it. No, I don't. I'm sorry to say.
Please don't apologise. We can see that it's from the Post Office if we scroll back to the first page.
Yes, indeed.
And what I wanted to ask you about, so it is generally headed that it's about national rollout progress, but if we turn on to the second page and we scroll down, the cash account section, which is second from the bottom.
Yes.
Cash accounts. Since the introduction of Horizon, there has been a significant reduction in amounts held in unclaimed payments, uncharged receipts. The same cannot be said of authorised shortages, and internal processes, including additional help to specific outlets, have been improved. The level of errors on Horizon continues to fall, but is still not returned to pre-Horizon levels. An analysis of root causes has led to a number of remedial actions being taken. So, in October 2000, the Post Office is saying that there are higher levels of errors on Horizon than there were before. Again, did this concern you?
It didn't surprise me. Yes, I was concerned about the whole thing at this stage, but it didn't surprise me because, as we've discussed before, there was some sub-postmasters weren't showing all the errors. Some were. And with Horizon, of course, they had to show the errors. And so I would not have been surprised to have seen that. Although I don't remember seeing it, of course.
Turning on to November 2000, if we could turn up NFSP 50153. This is a circular to the National Executive Council about ghost entries on gyro daily reports. Do you remember this
Yes.
incident? And if we turn over the page to page 2, and if we look at that main text in the middle of the box, it says there have been occasions where gyrobank transfers entered onto CSR Plus Horizon terminals may not be visible on the office copy and the Horizon daily records. The transaction will, however, be included in the grand total value and volume reported to the cash account. In addition, the individual totals on one or more Horizon daily records may be wrong. This fault is due to be fixed in December. So this is the post office telling you that that Horizon records may not be correct.
Yes.
Again, did this surprise you?
Yes, I think it did surprise me at the time. This was handled by my assistant, Kevin. Very good. And it did surprise me. It surprised me because I saw Post Office admitting now that there's something not quite right with the transaction record. That surprised me. But I was anxious to see a resolution to it.
And at this stage, were you aware of the Post Office prosecuting any of your members on the basis of Horizon data?
What's the date of this one?
So this is November 2000.
I was not aware then of prosecutions. If there were any, I don't think I heard about it, really.
Turning forward to the beginning of 2001, and if we could call up NFSP 50557. So this is the National Executive Council meeting. And if we turn to page 9 and scroll down, please. Yes, under Horizon implementation, it says, Mr. Pebbody reported that he thought that Don Gray did his best to sort out the problems with Horizon. Did you agree with that? Did you feel that Don Gray did a good job of sorting out the issues with Horizon?
I was taking advice on it from Mr. Pebbody.
Is that something we should ask him about?
Yeah, I think so.
And if we turn over to page 10, which is the next bit, and then F, thank you. Do you remember what Horizon polling problems were?
No, I don't. I'm just reading on a bit. I would imagine polling meant drawing information from post offices. But I don't know for sure. Sorry. Can't help you with that one.
Thank you. And then moving forward again to March 2001, if we can call up NFSP 000450513. And if we could turn to page 15. Scrolling down, please. Thank you. This again concerns Horizon polling problems. Does any of this refresh your memory?
I just have to take a minute to...
Oh no, please do, please do. Take your time.
I'm refreshing my memory, and I can't say that I've got a vivid memory of this, but the second paragraph there about the Horizon problems, the stories that we told, I mean, that's all very familiar to me.
So picking up on that second paragraph about the money held in the suspense account.
Yeah.
He had been led to understand that there was 10 million in a suspense account now as opposed to 2 million 18 months ago. Mm-hmm. Was that something you were aware of at the time?
No, it wasn't, but I was aware of it after John had told me.
Was it concerning to you?
Yes, I wondered how that happened, why it should be. Because as I go back, the contract says that the sub-postmaster makes good losses at the time. So is this money that the sub-postmaster put in that's in a suspense account? Or is this money that, I'm asking you the question, you don't know and I don't know, or whether it's a suspense account where sub-postmaster should have put £10 million in and hasn't done? I don't know.
If we could turn over the page to page 16. We can see Mr. Walsh asks a question. Mr. Walsh asked a question about losses and gains policy. Whose responsibility was it when a claim for money was sent out, whether it was put in as per the loss and gains policy or whether the total amount should be asked for? When Post Office Network requested repayment of money, they would know in the losses and gains policy they should only be asking for 25% plus 2,000 if the loss was 10,000. Why did they not ask for that immediately? And if we scroll down, Mr. Morgan Jones highlighted a particular case which was a hostage situation, and the sub-postmaster was asked to pay 53,000, which was now being reduced to 5,250. At the interview for the appeal, the sub-postmaster was asked if he was insured and gave Mr. Morgan Jones a great deal of concern. Eagle Star provided a 5,000 cover under certain circumstances. So at this stage, members are starting to raise concerns about people being asked to repay quite large sums of money on the basis of Horizon data. Is that right?
I don't know whether it was Horizon data, was it? Did it highlight particularly as a hostage situation? I'm not sure whether that was due because of Horizon or whether it was due to the hostage situation. Whether the sub-postmaster actually was taken hostage and gave the money out. I don't know. Honestly, don't know.
Turning forward then to 2003, if we could turn to NFSP 0000411. This is a letter that you received in 2003, and if we could scroll down and onto the second page. Scroll down, please. You received a letter from a firm of solicitors saying, we have been instructed in connection with recovery of a purported late account for a local post office. The postmaster, however, is adamant that she did not take that money. There is approximately 3,000 in dispute. Our client vehemently believes there was a glitch with the computer system that night, which cannot now be located. We wonder whether you're aware of any additional glitches with such systems. And if we could turn back to the first page, we can see your response, scrolling down. And you said, I can advise that at the time of migration from the manual system to the computerized one, a number of sub-postmasters complained of errors that have been created by the system. We have no way here of knowing whether such errors were as a result of the computer system, and therefore the matter was raised with the Post Office Limited. We are advised that all cases were examined and some were found to be computer glitches, whilst others were not. So that was your response when this was raised in 2003 as a potential cause of a shortfall. Is that right?
Well, there's another paragraph to follow that one, where I advised that the most production way forward to proceed would be for your client to request an investigation. As to the system, it should be able to identify all transactions undertaken. If your client is a member of our organisation, we'll be pleased to request such an investigation. So it wasn't just left there. I actually did suggest an action.
Did you remember receiving this letter?
I do, yes.
Did you think at the time that this might have been a manifestation of the issues that we've discussed today?
Yes, I thought it was a distinct possibility, yes.
Do you think that you deferred too much to the Post Office?
In as much as I was asking for an investigation into it, the National Federation of Postmasters couldn't investigate into it because we don't know the other end of the Horizon system and what was happening there. Only the Post Office and ICL Pathway could have undertaken that sort of investigation. But we did urge a member, I'm assuming it's a member, to go down that route. And what I've said in the final paragraph, we were pleased to request such an investigation. I don't think we heard anything from that.
Mr Baker, I don't have any further questions. Chair, do you have any questions for Mr Baker at this stage?
Well, there's just one, if I may. It arises out of paragraph 20 of Mr Baker's witness statement. So if that could be put on the screen, and Ms Kennedy, if you could give the number.
Yes, it is WITN, oh there it is, no need, WITN 037800100, just for the transcript.
And if you'd look at paragraph 20, please,
Certainly.
which is page 7 of 10 in the witness statement.
Thank you. Paragraph.
That's it.
Yeah.
And this is all part of a narrative which you've been taken through by council
Yes.
as to the various things that were happening essentially from 1999 onwards. And I read that paragraph as having occurred sometime in the year 2000, all right? So would you just read that to yourself
Yes.
to see if I've got that right? Because it's talking about postponement of acceptance of the system, etc., which would seem to mean that it was either late 99 or 2000.
Yes, that's correct. And that's underscored, I think, by the paragraph. Complaints at that time were mainly about training and delays in receiving help from the helpline. That was the feeling that we had at the time. Yes, that's about right.
Right. Now, what I wanted to ask you about are two names about 6 lines down.
All right, yes.
First of all, is David Mills correct, or should it be David Miller?
No, that's David Mills. He was.
It is David Mills.
He was
that's
David
fine.
Miller's boss. He was the.
And then for the first time in this phase, the name Paula Venables has cropped up.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
So could you just explain to me your understanding of what role Ms. Venables was playing
Yeah.
in 1999-2000?
I would. I think she was the managing director of Post Office Council Limited.
Right. Thank
She
you.
was a pretty high up person.
And are you saying in that, where you use the phrase, we continue to raise them with David Mills and Ms. Venables, that you personally, either in writing or orally, discussed these issues with Ms. Venables?
Yes.
Fine. All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed.
Chair, we've given permission for Mr Steen and Miss Page to ask questions.
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Mr Baker, good afternoon. My name is Sam Steen. I represent a very large number of sub-postmasters, mistresses and managers. I'm going to take you directly, please, to a document with the reference POL 000 28530. Now, Mr Baker, in your evidence, you have stressed that without automation, I quote from you, without account automation, we would be doomed. I'm sure it was life-saving for us. That appears to be an attitude that you've expressed throughout your evidence. Now, I assume from what you're saying in your evidence that you mean that without automation, or your perception of what automation can do, then many, many branch offices of the post office would be closed.
Many sub-post offices. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Eventually closed. Yes. I don't think the axe would fall instantly.
So that was the threat that you were working under and seeking to avoid. Is that correct?
Threat. Yes. Yes. I would concede that. Although I don't like the word threat, to be honest.
Let's have a look at this document then. This is in November of 1998, as you can see, Restricted Policy and Commercial, Department of Trade and Industry. And it's for the attention of Jonathan Evans from Isabel Anderson, Postal Services Directorate. Can we go to relatively page 2, please? And we'll see there that under the heading Restricted Policy and Commercial, this is the draft as at 6:30 p.m. on the 13th of November 1998, BA Pockle Automation Project. So this goes back to those particular days, as you can see that it included at that particular point BA, and then it's an interdepartmental working group report to ministers. So we can see what this is about.
Yep.
This is a briefing to report to ministers in relation to matters as of that time. Okay. And then if we can now move, please, to the bottom of page 7 of 30. At this point in the document is going through the various options. So if you look at recap on the options, the impact of each option on the benefits agency and the post office are driven by the following key factors. So it's looking at different options that are available for the possible continuation of the project. And then under managing the changes to the post office network, the response of the post office under each option, and in particular how any changes to the network will be managed, would be an important factor in any decision on the way forward. There are differences of view between the parties on, and then if we go over the page please, the ability of the post office to manage changes to the network under each scenario. And then can we then concentrate please on key issues will be. And the first one is to how to maximise Pockle's existing customer base as benefit payment switches to ACT. Second one, how to maintain relations with existing clients. And then third one please, and if we can highlight the third bullet point, how to ensure, that one please. Thank you. How to ensure that the sub-postmasters, private agents who run the majority of the post office network, perceive that post office business can provide a viable future and do not voluntarily exit the market, brackets reducing the ability of the post office to manage network closures and migrate business to other offices.
See that, yes.
Okay. And then if we can go down to paragraph 21, and again highlight paragraph 21 this time please. So paragraph 21 says, under all options, the post office will be seeking to manage a reshaping of the network against a background of commitment to a nationwide network of post offices. I'm only pausing, Mr. Baker, so that you can make sure.
Oh, okay. No, I was following you.
No, I understand, but just so that you're comfortable with having your glass of water.
Okay.
Under all options, the post office will be seeking to manage a reshaping of the network against a background of commitment to a nationwide network of post offices. Their objective is to retain the current levels of access, particularly in rural areas, but to reduce over-provision in some urban and suburban areas, replacing some physical offices with electronic access points. Current trends would in any case see a reduction in the rural network by 200 offices each year and a gradual shift to ACT-based methods of payment over time by 2009-10. Almost 50% of claimants are expected to have switched to ACT. Compared to the current network of 19,000 offices, Pockle believe that their vision for the future could be served by a network consisting of around 11 to 13,000 full service offices, supplemented by 5 to 10,000 electronic access points, many of which could continue to be sited in existing post offices. So in November of 1998, were you aware of this vision that the post office had regarding a substantial closure?
No, I wasn't. And I would have been surprised if they'd have shared it with me, to be honest.
And do you see that under the third bullet point, what's being set out here in the briefing to ministers is that, bearing in mind what you can see in paragraph 21, that what was being thought to be appropriate was to ensure that sub-postmasters, private agents who run the majority of the post office network, perceive that post office business can provide a viable future. And you're an ex-postmaster yourself. I don't know how you funded your own post office branch, but you'll understand that many people had loans, they invested their own funds, savings into it.
Yes,
They did that on the hope that they would have a settled provision for the future.
that's correct.
They hoped that the money from the post office and the money they'd get from any associated other business that they'd run alongside the post office would provide them with a reasonable income and hopefully therefore provide them with an income to satisfy their children's needs, their own needs and indeed retire in the future?
Yes.
Okay. So presumably what you were doing, Mr. Baker, was that you were seeing automation as being, in your mind, the best way to preserve this big network of 18, 19,000 offices.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Precisely for the reasons I've just gone through, which is that these are hard-working people that have put a lot of time and effort.
We were
and money.
also doing other things as well. We got a compensation for office agreement with the Post Office Limited, so that should the axe fall on any particular sub-post office, that sub-postmaster could be compensated. That was a negotiation by the National Federation of Postmasters, one of which I'm proud, because there was something there for the sub-postmaster should the axe fall, because the sub-postmaster's contract isn't the gift of the post office, and we've got to prepare our members for should that happen. Now, with that compensation agreement, some sub-postmasters volunteered closure. It was worth their while to go, and because maybe they could see the writing on the wall, but that is most definitely, it's impeccable what you've just read out there. That's true, but we had to seek to address it, and that's something else which we were doing.
You say it's true, but were you aware of this vision? Did you?
I wasn't aware of the
understand
vision,
that
no.
was in-
No, I was aware that there's plenty of facts stuck there, but I was not aware that that was the post office vision, no.
What have you done? You knew this.
Well, what I would have done, and what I did, was champion something called the, left my papers behind. It was a government report of which we had a great say in it, and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair at the time, came out in favour of it, and it stressed there what we should do. I haven't got it with me. It was the PIU report. Have you read it, sir? Can I recommend it to you? Thank you.
Do you feel as though that you were misled by the post office if this was what they had in mind, this intention to cut by well over a third the post office in 1998 using
No, I don't think I was misled because
using the very system of automation that in fact you championed? Do you consider that you were misled by the post office?
no, sir.
Why not?
I consider
here you are championing
yes, I
the
am.
automation of the project,
Yeah.
and in fact they intended it to cut massively.
But they didn't. Influences were at work, not least of those of the National Federation of Postmasters, who got this PIU report, and I do recommend you read it, then you might reconsider your question to me. You might.
Mr. Baker, the position of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters appears to have been to have essentially attempt to work with the post office to get the automation set out within all of the post office branches.
That is
Yeah,
absolutely correct, sir.
that's right. Did that mean that you had to keep facts back from your own membership?
No.
No. So you adequately told them, did you, at all times about the problems that you were aware of?
Yes. In fact, you've probably got all the evidence that I got, 2 folios full of it, meetings with the Executive Council, meetings with the branches. In addition to that, we had a sub-postmaster's journal, the sub-postmaster it was called, monthly, and there was to and fro exchange of information, and I didn't keep anything from, particularly the naughty stories, I didn't keep them from you at all. But I believe that because they got a lot of money invested in it, that they deserve to know which way was up, personally.
All right, Mr. Baker. I'll leave it there. You may have been told by the inquiry that you're expected to return at a later stage in.
No, I haven't been told that. I look forward to it.
You're
Thank
expected to return later stage in the hearings,
Okay.
Mr. Baker, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Baker, hello. My
Hello.
name is Flora Page. I'm also representing a number of the sub-postmasters
Laura, nice to
in
meet you.
proceedings. Can I just clear up something to start off with, which I expect is just that somebody else bears your name? I just want to clear this up.
Okay.
A Colin Baker appears occasionally in technical fault documents on ICL. You never would have seen those, would you?
I would be the last people to be pointing faults to ICL, to be honest with you.
No, thank you. That's just, as I say, to clear that up. Can I then please look at a slightly different bit of a document we've already looked at, which is NFSP 50203. And this is the report of the Horizon Working Group meeting, which was interjected into the middle of your NFSP meeting.
Okay, yeah.
As I understand it, you were at your NFSP meeting, you went to the working group, and then you returned. If we go down, please, to paragraph 6, I think it is.
Thank you.
Yes, actually, if we, sorry, I do apologise. If we start off, first of all, with paragraph 4, you've looked at your interjection, paragraph 5, but I just want to look at what's said either side of your interjection. And we've looked at the fact that Ms. Rigo had pointed out some emerging issues around acceptance, and over the page, she says, or at least I suspect it's her who says, there was a need to establish exactly what POCL was buying. ICL have not allowed access to POCL so that they could determine this, and have insisted that it is not a contractual issue. They have, however, indicated they're willing to talk informally. POCL consider the issue to be too important to the future commercial prospects of the project to rest on a purely informal and unenforceable indication. And that, no doubt, is what you were reacting to when you said it was extremely important for the rollout to be absolutely right. So, in effect, what they're saying here at this quite important juncture, after the Post Office has relatively recently gone into the bilateral agreement,
Sure.
They're saying they don't really know what they're buying and that ICL aren't giving them access to it.
Yeah.
So, no doubt you're saying, well, hang on a minute, we need to know what this is all about before it's rolled out. What I want to look at is the next paragraph where Mr. McCartney, the Minister of State, said that rollout was crucial. He was emphatically not prepared to accept getting away from the commitment to 2001. Slippage would make the wider discussions on government usage of the network impossible. If there were problems with software, training, etc., then these should have been flagged up earlier and must now be resolved in a way that enabled the 2001 timetable to be recovered. Now, was that really automation at any price there?
Well, you were quoting Mr. McCartney's words to me, and I suppose it could be interpreted as that, yes. But what my bit about my comments relating to automation at any price was the way in which sub-postmasters were browbeaten and treated. And that's the price that I found unacceptable.
All right, well,
We can talk about getting the bits and bobs right, you know, the software and hardware and position on the counters and the helpline, and that was work in progress all the time. But the bit that I found totally unacceptable was that, where the treatment of sub-postmasters.
all right, well, we'll come back to that. But what Mr. McCartney here is saying is that, in effect, this is going to be pushed through no matter what, isn't he? 2001 is happening.
Yeah, that's what he's saying there, yeah. Whether that was fact or not, I don't know, because we got told some stuff.
Well, when you then go back to your meeting, and so if we can now have a look at, again, at NFSP 50203, and I think if we go down to page 23, I think it is.
I'm being told that's the same document and there are only 6
Oh, I'm so
pages.
sorry. I've cited the wrong reference. Hang on for a moment. It's 471, NFSP 471, 471, and it's page 29, in fact, that. 471, NFSP 50471, and it's page 29, in fact, that. 471, NFSP 50471, and it's page 29, in fact, that. 471, NFSP 50471, and it's page 29, in fact, that. 471, NFSP 50471, and it's page 29, in fact, that. I wanted to zoom in on. And a little, well, in that large paragraph in the bottom half of the page, about partway through, this appears to be you reporting back on your view on Mr. McCartney. And it tells us that Mr. McCartney appeared to be wholeheartedly in favour of preserving and improving the post office system. That's sort of just over halfway down the big paragraph. Do you see that?
Yeah.
It was felt by Mr. Pebbody and Mr. Baker that he will be a valuable ally in the struggle for replacement of the lost benefits work with other government usage of post offices.
Yes.
We hope that he will remain in the job long enough to see the project through to fruition.
There we go.
And so, in other words, your take on Mr. McCartney was his determination to see this through, even if there were software problems, was a good thing.
Well, it was wider than that, if I could put words into Mr. McCarthy's mouth. It was wider than that, and the reference is to utilising the network for other things other than benefit agency payments, because by then we knew that the axe was going to fall on benefit agency payments. So what Ian McCartney was saying, and whether it's all documented there or not, I couldn't say, but he was on side with the other things that sub-postmasters could do. And some of the things in the PRU report was sub-postmasters, with the use of automation, could be general practitioners for government. A one-stop shop to go and access government motor vehicle licenses, forms, that sort of thing you could get from the local post office. And if you can imagine that the vision, certainly the vision I had, and I think it was shared with many people, was there was this ubiquitous network standing there ready to enable people to go and interrogate government. We could give them bus timetables, we could do all sorts of things because we got the automation there to do it with. That was the vision, and I think that Ian McCartney actually shared that view, not the precise detail, but shared the view that there was more things that the post office could do.
If we could just take the document down for a moment. So what I think you're saying, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is that there were two sides to what Mr. McCartney was saying. On the one hand, he wanted to get this done absolutely on time. Mm-hmm. He had no hesitation in saying software problems, I don't mind about that, I want to get this rolled out.
Yes.
But on the plus side, he had this vision for what Horizon was going to be able to do. And ultimately, perhaps that's what you're talking about when you refer to the PRU report in due course.
That is exactly what
that's where that was all.
Have you read it, madam?
I have. So
good, isn't it?
I'll come back to that perhaps as well if I have time. But the point is that at this juncture, despite what you've told us was ringing in your ears about the trauma of people's experiences with the software, mm-hmm. you were prepared to see him as an ally with that software rolling out no matter what, because of what you could get out of it, what you saw you were able to get out of it in the future.
I think that's an extremely black and white view of the world, of my world as it was at the time. I go back to saying that we saw automation of post office counters as the answer to our problems. Okay? Not pathway, not ICL, automation of post office counters. And it was essential that that came along because of all the other things it brought with it. Ian McCartney seemed to have a grasp of that. His job was to get the thing delivered. That wasn't my job. That was his job to get it delivered. And he's making the statements that he makes because that's his job. My job is to protect and defend the interests of sub-postmasters. And by doing that, I'm also thinking about their business and their livelihoods and all that sort of thing as well. So, to some extent, we come from different positions. But it's as well that you understand other people's opinions and what they're about before you can actually get a good negotiation with them. So, yeah, he seemed to be saying the right words. And I'm sure that he was saying those words because somebody got a knife in his back saying you better deliver it or not.
All right. Well, if I may then, there's another document I'd like to put to you, which is CBO 001 406 _ 074.
Yeah.
And if we could perhaps zoom in a bit so it's a bit easier for us
Thank
to
you.
read.
Yeah.
What we can see is that this is a letter to the Chancellor. And if we go down to the end,
Yeah.
I think we're nearly there. It's from Mr. Byers. And what it tells us, sorry if you don't mind, if we go back to the beginning, is that in July of 2000, Mr. Byers was rather pleased that he'd been able to keep you on board. And this is in relation to the PRU report. And he says, in that at the end of that top paragraph, we achieved a key objective of securing public support from Colin Baker. Next paragraph. Much remains to be done, however. There has been a good deal of criticism of Colin's stance from elements within the NFSP who believe that the commitments made in our response to the PRU report lack sufficient substance, brackets, and this will be a recurring theme until we're able to attach pound signs, I take it, or £1 million pound signs, to specific funding packages when we announce SR 2000, about which I've written separately. Unless we're able to show regular and tangible progress with implementation of the package, there is a real risk that Colin will be unable to hold the line with his Executive Council and the wider membership. A resumption of the Federation's campaign, accompanied by accusations that the government has shown itself to be cynical and duplicitous on this issue, would be politically disastrous. And I therefore look to EA colleagues to cooperate fully in taking forward urgently the various elements of the package. He says, nowhere is this more true than in respect of the Universal Bank? And he goes on to talk about how important that particular element of it was. So is that right? Was there a real difficulty with holding the line, as it were?
One of the tools in the General Secretary's bag is to threaten the government with dire action from his members.
Certainly.
And I can't control the members, Governor, you know, they'll do
So
what they want
to
to do.
some extent, this was a little bit of negotiation, was it? With the
It
government?
was precisely that, yes.
All right. So would you say that you were carrying reasonably easily the NFSP with you?
No, I wouldn't say I was carrying them easily. And there was one or two of them that would call for my resignation and other things, horrible stuff. It wasn't the easiest of rides, but I always had my eye on the goal, and that goal was a network of automated post offices. And I just remind, you know, if you don't mind, saying that we set out to get counter-automation for post offices, and at the end of it, every single...
Interrupt to say that the document can come down so that the chair can see you.
All right. Hello.
Please
Chair.
do go on. I'm so sorry.
Okay. I'm proud of the results of the negotiations that we carried out through all that period. Not every post office is automated now, but every single counter position in every post office, at no cost to the sub-postmasters, no cost to our members. So I don't know how you measure success, but I think that was a successful period. Now, yeah, in part, there were sub-postmasters that wanted to nibble at my ankles. That's a fair game. I've always said the tallest tree gets most of the wind, and I got a fair bit of it.
Well, the point is, isn't it, that you achieved your goal of automating the post office, but alongside that, we know that between 2000 and 2014, 736 sub-postmasters were prosecuted on the basis of Horizon evidence, or at least 736. That's a figure that has been put about. What did your organisation do to join the dots and recognise this unlikely crime wave was actually a result of implementing Horizon?
When I was General Secretary of the organisation, we were consistently beating a path to the Post Office's door, consistently, and including up to and including the counter losses. But I've said before, it was a slow roll, these Horizon losses, and I retired in 2007, so I can't say anything about what happened after then. Forgive me. But I think we did our absolute utmost. I don't know how many of the 700 or so were pre-2007 or post-2007. I've not seen that information. I don't know whether all or any were members of the Federation. I don't know whether all or any actually referred it to the Federation. So it's not a question that I would attempt to answer, and I would venture to suggest it's not a question you should attempt to ask.
Well, we may come back to that, Mr. Baker.
Okay.
Thank you. Those are the questions I have for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker, for taking the trouble to write a witness statement, but perhaps more importantly, taking the trouble to answer very many questions this morning.
Chair, I'm so sorry. We also have questions from Miss Watt from the NFSP.
Right,
So
right.
apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions arising from the evidence that's been given. Thank you very much for allowing these to be asked. Mr. Baker, you gave evidence earlier about, in the pre-Horizon situation, of how discrepancies or errors could arise on balancing, and I just wondered if, in the wider context of how such errors, as you described, occurring, when we hear about the post-Horizon errors that you were asked about, is every error that arose there as a result of Horizon, as far as you can tell?
I couldn't possibly tell. I wouldn't know what was an Horizon error and what wasn't, unless I knew exactly what was going on in that particular post office. I'm reliant, as I hope anyway you can grasp, I'm reliant on the information that's fed to me. And then I have to test that information. So if a non-member tried, if it was a non-Horizon error, like I think we've already touched on one today where it was a hostage situation. You know, so you've got to actually analyse them all. But no, absolutely not.
You talked about hindsight in your evidence and,
Yes, indeed.
and what you know now, but at the time, were you working on this, for instance, the Horizon Working Group, and in any other situations, with other representative bodies, those who represented other employees or managers, as well as the NFSP, and how were you working with them? What were they doing?
I don't know what they were doing offline, I'm sure, but in the meetings, some were quite vocal, some were not so vocal. I think I was an irritant, maybe the grain of sand in the oyster, perhaps. I get the impression, I mean, there was a vast array of people. There was ministers and all sorts. I think probably I was one of the most vocal. But there were others. I think I was one of the most vocal.
Can you recall who else was involved?
I think the General Secretary of the CWU was involved, and he had a word or two to say. And I don't think the post office was saying much at that time, but I don't know what meetings it's had before or after, you see, and so, again, it's a wise man who knows what he doesn't know.
Just staying with the theme of hindsight, thinking about that, do you think that you or they, these other organisations, based on what you knew at the time, could have foreseen what was going to happen?
No, we couldn't foresee that. I mean, we were focused, as we said in the meeting, we were focused really on the Horizon platform, and losses, counter losses, at that time stood outside of that, really. I mean, they only came flowing in when we realised just how many there were, and that was post those meetings that we were having. So no, we no way could we envisage that.
And just to sum up from your evidence, in the light of all that you've said and been asked and what you now know, in what way do you feel in your time as General Secretary that you and the NFSP represented all the interests of your members in relation to the Horizon scheme?
Yes, I do. In fact, we were championing counter automation not only for sub-postmasters, but for the whole network, the CWU and CMA and people of that nature. So yeah, I think we're all right. I think we did okay.
Thank you. No
Thank
further
you.
questions.
Thank you. Chair, I have one clarificatory re-examination question.
Of course.
When you were asked questions by the Chair a moment ago about paragraph 20 of your witness statement, David Mills and Paula Venables,
Oh yes.
you were asked about whether you were speaking to Miss Venables in the year 2000. Miss Venables didn't start at the post office until 2007.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have been speaking to her in the year 2000 about these issues?
No, that's true. Thank you for that. Yeah, it would be who Paula Reynolds replaced, which I think was David Miller.
Thank you.
But David Mills was the I think he was chief executive or chairman or something. He was pretty high up. David Mills was, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I have no further questions.
Fine. And I had launched into a thanks to you, Mr. Baker, when I was told very politely that the session hadn't ended. So I think it has ended now, but my thanks remain the same. Thank you very much for coming.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the participants in this. I wish you every success with this inquiry. It needed doing, and I wish you every success. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we going to take an hour and then safely complete Sir Ian McCartney this afternoon?
Yes.
As far as you're aware?
Yes, Chair, as far as I'm aware, coming back at 2, so taking a full hour for lunch.
Fine. Very good. Then that's what we'll do.
Thank you.